She inherited a crumbling roadside motel from a complete stranger. Everyone said it was worthless property that would drain her savings. But when her rescue dog refused to leave one particular room and kept pawing frantically at the walls, she realized this abandoned building was hiding a secret that would expose a truth buried for decades and change not just her life, but the lives of everyone in the small mountain town of Willowbrook. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments. Have you ever inherited something that seemed worthless but turned out to be valuable? We'd love to hear your stories. Victoria Reeves had constructed her 34 years around the comforting predictability of routine. Every morning at 6:30 a.m., she brewed coffee in her cramped studio apartment above Riverside Books, the independent bookstore she'd managed for the past 8 years in the college town of Ashford, Oregon. By 7:15, she was downstairs arranging displays, and by 8 o'clock, she was unlocking the front door for the day's first customers. Her life had the gentle rhythm of turning pages. Students shuffled in seeking textbooks or escape novels. Professors browsed the philosophy section while debating Nietzsche over lukewarm coffee from the shop next door. Elderly residents discovered romance novels and shared stories about books they'd loved decades ago. Victoria knew most customers by name, remembered their preferences, and had built something that felt like community in a world that increasingly seemed to favor isolation. The only unpredictable element in Victoria's carefully ordered existence was Ranger, a 3-year-old German Shepherd mix she'd rescued from the county shelter 2 years earlier. The dog had been found wandering Highway 101, underweight and wary of strangers, but with an intelligence in his amber eyes that Victoria couldn't ignore. Now he spent his days sleeping behind the counter, greeting regular customers with gentle tail wags, and accompanying Victoria on evening walks through Ashford's tree-lined neighborhoods. Victoria's family history was as sparse as her apartment furnishings. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 22, leaving her with enough insurance money to finish college and a profound understanding that security was something you built yourself, brick by careful brick. She had no siblings, no cousins who stayed in touch, no grandmother sending birthday cards. Her family tree had effectively ended with her, which was why the certified letter that arrived on a rain-soaked Thursday in October made absolutely no sense. The envelope bore the embossed letterhead of Hartwell and Associates, attorneys at law, from a town called Willowbrook that Victoria had never heard of. The return address indicated it was somewhere in the Cascade Mountains, about 4 hours east of Ashford. Inside, formal legal language informed her that one Dolores Brennan had passed away 6 weeks prior at the age of 78 and had bequeathed to Victoria Reeves the entirety of her estate. The Sunset Haven Motel, located at 1847 Mountain View Road, Willowbrook, Oregon, along with all structures, furnishings, and the surrounding 4 acres of land. Victoria read the document 3 times, checking and rechecking her name and address. According to the attached paperwork, Dolores Brennan had been very specific about this inheritance. She had met with the lawyers 8 months before her death, bringing documents that confirmed Victoria's identity, and had insisted that everything be left to Victoria Reeves of Ashford, Oregon, manager of Riverside Books. The lawyer's cover letter mentioned that Ms. Brennan had declined to explain her reasoning for this decision, stating only that Miss Reeves will understand when the time comes. Victoria had never heard of Dolores Brennan. She'd certainly never been to Willowbrook. She spent an hour searching online for any connection between her family and this stranger, but found nothing. Her parents had lived in Oregon their entire lives, but in Portland, not some mountain town she'd never heard of. The mystery deepened when she called the law office. Ms. Brennan was quite insistent about the inheritance, explained Margaret Hartwell, the senior partner, her voice kind but puzzled. She came to us in February with all your information already researched. Address, workplace, even details about your bookstore. She'd done her homework, that's for certain. But when we asked why she'd chosen you, she just smiled and said some debts take a lifetime to repay. Margaret paused, shuffling papers. I have to tell you, Miss Reeves, Dolores was sharp as a tack right up until the end. This wasn't the decision of someone who wasn't thinking clearly. She knew exactly what she was doing. Act 2, Community Reactions and Research, 600 words. Victoria's first instinct was to call her best friend, Carmen Martinez, who taught high school English and had a talent for seeing possibilities where others saw problems. Carmen's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. Victoria, this is like something out of a novel. A mysterious inheritance from a stranger? You have to go see it. What if this Dolores person was related to you somehow? What if she's leaving you clues to some family secret? But when Victoria began making inquiries about the property, the responses were far less encouraging. She called 3 different real estate agents in the Willowbrook area, and their reactions followed the same pattern. Initial interest that quickly deflated when she mentioned the Sunset Haven Motel. "Oh, that old place," said Janet Rodriguez from Mountain View Realty, her tone shifting to sympathy. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that property's been a liability for years. The motel closed down around 2008 when the new highway bypass opened. Dolores refused every offer to sell, even when the county was pressuring her to demolish it for safety reasons. The roof needs replacing, the septic system is probably shot, and it's been sitting empty for over a decade." Another agent was even more blunt. "Honey, you inherited a money pit. The land might have some value, but you'd probably spend more tearing down that old motel than you'd make selling the lot." Dolores was a sweet woman, but she held on to that place way past its time. "I'm sorry someone left you with that burden." Victoria spent the weekend researching everything she could find about Willowbrook and the Sunset Haven Motel. The town had a population of just under 3,000, nestled in a valley between 2 peaks of the Cascade Range. It had been a logging town until the 1990s, then briefly reinvented itself as a tourist destination when the scenic highway brought travelers through the area. But when the state built a faster route that bypassed the town entirely, Willowbrook's economy had struggled. The Sunset Haven appeared in online reviews from the early 2000s, mostly positive comments about its clean rooms and friendly service, with several mentions of the owner, Dolores, who guests described as welcoming and knowledgeable about local hiking trails. The last reviews were from 2008, and after that, the motel simply vanished from travel websites. Victoria found an old newspaper article from the Willowbrook Gazette about Dolores Brennan receiving a Small Business Award in 2005 for her community service. The photo showed a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, standing in front of the motel's vintage neon sign. She was described as a 30-year resident who had moved to Willowbrook from California and had been active in the Chamber of Commerce and local environmental groups. The article mentioned that she had never married and had no children. Nothing in the research explained why this woman had left her life's work to a complete stranger. Act 3. The decision to investigate, 400 words. Victoria spent 2 weeks wrestling with the decision. The practical choice was obvious. Sign the papers to transfer the property to a local buyer, take whatever small amount the land might bring, and return to her predictable life in Ashford. She had responsibilities, a business that depended on her, and a carefully maintained budget that couldn't absorb the costs of maintaining a derelict motel 4 hours away. But late at night, when the bookstore was quiet and Ranger was curled up beside her chair, Victoria found herself thinking about Dolores Brennan. She studied the photograph from the newspaper article, searching the woman's face for some clue about her motivations. What kind of person leaves their most valuable possession to a stranger? What had she seen in Victoria that Victoria couldn't see in herself? The decision crystallized on a gray Friday morning when Victoria was arranging a display of local history books. One volume contained a chapter about small businesses that had shaped Oregon communities, and there, on page 127, was another photograph of the Sunset Haven Motel. This one was from the 1980s, showing the property in its prime. Fresh paint, manicured landscaping, and a parking lot filled with family sedans and RVs. The caption read, "The Sunset Haven Motel served as a gateway to outdoor recreation in the Cascades, welcoming families from across the Pacific Northwest." Victoria traced her finger along the image, imagining the conversations that had taken place in those rooms, the children who had pressed their faces against the windows to watch for deer, the couples who had found respite there during long road trips. This place had mattered to people. It had been someone's dream made real. She called Carmen during her lunch break. "I think I need to see it," she said. "I can't make a decision about something I've never laid eyes on." "Now you're talking," Carmen replied. "When do we leave?" You don't think I'm missing this adventure, do you? Besides, you'll need someone to talk you out of any crazy ideas you might get about keeping a haunted motel." Victoria laughed, but as she hung up the phone, She realized that Carmen's joke had touched on something she hadn't admitted to herself. Part of her was already hoping she might want to keep it. Act 4. The Journey to Willowbrook, 400 words. On Saturday morning, Victoria closed the bookstore early and loaded Ranger into her 10-year-old Subaru. Carmen had brought a thermos of coffee and a bag of road trip snacks, approaching the expedition with the enthusiasm of someone embarking on a treasure hunt. The drive took them through familiar Oregon landscapes, rolling farmland, dense forests, and small towns that seemed frozen in earlier decades. As they climbed into the Cascades, the scenery shifted to towering evergreens and occasional glimpses of snow-capped peaks. Willowbrook appeared around a curve in the highway like something from a vintage postcard, a main street lined with buildings from the 1940s and 1950s, many showing signs of recent renovation efforts. A hand-painted sign welcomed visitors to historic Willowbrook, gateway to adventure. They stopped for lunch at Annie's Diner, a classic chrome and red vinyl establishment that could have been transplanted from a 1950s movie set. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and a name tag reading Brenda, brightened when Victoria mentioned she was looking for the Sunset Haven Motel. "Oh, you must be the one who inherited Dolores's place," Brenda said, topping off their coffee. Word travels fast in a town this size. Dolores was a real sweetheart, you know. Always helping folks out. Never had a bad word for anyone. It's a shame what happened to that motel after the bypass opened. She poured her heart into that place. "Did you know her well?" Victoria asked. "Well enough. She came in here for coffee most mornings, always ordered the same thing, scrambled eggs, wheat toast, orange juice. Real creature of habit. She mentioned you a few times in her last months, actually." Victoria nearly choked on her coffee. "She mentioned me?" "Just that she'd made arrangements for someone to inherit the property. Someone who would understand what it meant to preserve something important. She seemed real peaceful about it, like she'd solved a puzzle that had been bothering her for years." Brenda leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Between you and me, there were folks who thought Dolores was holding on to that place for sentimental reasons, but I always figured there was more to it. She was too practical a woman to keep pouring money into a business that wasn't making any. If she held on to it this long, she had her reasons." The waitress straightened up as another customer signaled for service. "The motel's about 3 miles out on Mountain View Road. You can't miss it. It's the only building out that way." Act 5. First sight of the Sunset Haven, 400 words. 20 minutes later, Victoria turned off Mountain View Road onto a cracked asphalt driveway that curved through a stand of towering ponderosa pines. The Sunset Haven Motel materialized ahead of them like a relic from another era, and despite all the warnings about its condition, Victoria's first reaction was not disappointment, but recognition. The building formed a gentle U-shape around what had once been a landscaped courtyard. The architecture was classic 1960s motor lodge. Low-slung lines, large windows, and a flat roof that suggested optimism about the future. The paint had faded from what must have been a cheerful yellow to the color of old cream, and several window shutters hung at odd angles. But the bones of the structure were clearly solid. The famous neon sign stood at the entrance to the parking lot. Its Sunset Haven Motel, lettering now dark and partially broken, but still imposing against the backdrop of forest and mountains. Someone had planted the landscaping with care decades ago. Mature ornamental trees, overgrown flower beds that still showed traces of deliberate design, and a stone-lined path that led from the office to individual room entrances. "It's not as bad as I expected," Carmen said, stepping out of the car and looking around. "I mean, it needs work, but it has good bones. And this location is incredible." She was right. The motel sat in a natural clearing that provided views of the surrounding peaks, and the afternoon sun filtering through the pine trees created a cathedral-like atmosphere. Victoria could imagine how magical this place must have been in its heyday. Families arriving after long drives to find themselves surrounded by wilderness and natural beauty. Ranger had been unusually quiet during the drive, but now he was alert and focused, nose pressed against the car window, tail wagging with an intensity Victoria rarely saw. When she opened the door, he bounded out and immediately began exploring the courtyard, sniffing the overgrown planters and investigating the base of the old neon sign. Victoria retrieved the keys from her purse, a ring of old-fashioned metal keys that Margaret Hartwell had mailed to her. each tagged with faded plastic numbers corresponding to different rooms and areas of the property. The largest key, marked Office, fits smoothly into the main building's front door. The office door opened with a groan of hinges that hadn't been used in months, releasing air that smelled of dust, old wood, and something faintly floral, perhaps the ghost of cleaning products from the motel's operational days. Inside, Victoria found herself stepping into a time capsule from the late 1990s. The check-in counter was solid wood, darkened with age but well-crafted, behind which stood a wall of numbered slots for room keys and mail. An old cash register sat beside a reservation book that lay open to a page from September 2008, the last entries written in a careful script that must have been Dolores's handwriting. Victoria could make out names and license plate numbers, fragments of the motel's final guests. Behind the counter, a doorway led to what had obviously been Dolores's private office. The space was neat despite its abandonment. A wooden desk with organized stacks of papers, filing cabinets that looked like they'd been recently cleaned, and walls covered with framed photographs showing the motel in various stages of its history. Victoria studied these images, watching the property evolve from a new construction project in what looked like the early 1960s to the well-established business it had become by the 1980s and 1990s. Carmen had been exploring the guest areas of the office, a sitting area with vintage furniture and a rack of tourism brochures for attractions that were probably long closed. "Look at this," she called, holding up a guest registry book. People signed in from all over the country. This place was really something in its day. Victoria used the room keys to begin exploring the guest accommodations. The motel had 12 units total, arranged in the U shape with the office at the center. Rooms 1 through 6 occupied the left wing, while rooms 7 through 12 formed the right side. Each room revealed the same story: mid-century furnishings that had aged gracefully, water stains on ceilings where the roof had leaked, and the musty smell of abandonment, but also evidence of care in the details. The bedspreads, though faded, were quality fabric. The bathroom fixtures were period-appropriate, but had been well-maintained. Someone had invested in making these spaces comfortable for travelers. Ranger had been following them from room to room, sniffing corners and investigating bathroom areas with the thoroughness of a detective. But when they reached the right wing of the motel, his behavior changed dramatically. As Victoria unlocked room 9, Ranger suddenly bolted ahead toward the far end of the building, his tail rigid and ears forward in a posture she'd never seen from him before. He stopped in front of room 11, second from the end, and began whining, a low, insistent sound that made the hair on Victoria's arms stand up. "What's gotten into him?" Carmen asked, but Victoria was already following the dog, keys jangling as she hurried down the covered walkway that connected the rooms. Ranger was pawing at the base of room 11's door, occasionally stopping to look back at Victoria as if urging her to hurry. When she inserted the key and turned it, the dog immediately pushed past her into the room, his nose to the floor as he began systematically investigating every corner. Room 11 was different from the others in subtle but unmistakable ways. While the other rooms had been stripped of personal items and showed signs of neglect, this space felt recently inhabited. The bed was made with military precision, the surfaces were dust-free, and the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaning solution rather than abandonment. On the nightstand sat a small lamp, a glass of water that couldn't have been there long, and a leather-bound journal. "Someone's been staying here," Carmen said, looking around with obvious unease. "Recently." Victoria picked up the journal and opened it to the first page. The same careful handwriting she'd seen in the office reservation book filled the pages, but these weren't business records. They were personal notes, written in the months before Dolores's death. "March 15th, she'll come eventually. I've left enough clues for someone with her intelligence to piece together the truth. The room is ready. March 22nd, had another dream about Robert last night. 40 years, and I still see his face. Some secrets are too heavy to carry alone. April 3rd, the lawyer thinks I'm being sentimental, leaving everything to a stranger. He doesn't understand that some debts transcend family lines." Victoria flipped through several more pages, each entry adding to the mystery, until Ranger's behavior became impossible to ignore. The dog had moved to the wall that separated room 11 from room 12 and was now pawing frantically at a specific spot near the bathroom entrance. whining with increasing urgency. "He's found something," Victoria said, kneeling beside the dog. Victoria ran her hands along the wall where Ranger was focused and immediately felt something wrong. The wood paneling felt hollow here, different from the solid walls elsewhere in the room. When she pressed against it, she heard a faint clicking sound, and a section of the panel shifted inward slightly, revealing the edge of a hidden compartment. Inside Dolores's journal, the next entry read, "The truth is behind the wall. Victoria will know what to do with it." Ranger's whining grew more insistent, and as Victoria examined the hidden panel more closely, she realized that whatever Dolores Brennan had left her wasn't just a rundown motel. It was a mystery that had been waiting decades for the right person to solve it. What did Dolores hide behind the wall of room 11? Subscribe and hit the bell. Part 2 reveals the first shocking discovery that will change everything Victoria thought she knew about her inheritance and the real reason a stranger left her the Sunset Haven Motel. Victoria's hands trembled as she pressed against the hollow section of wall paneling. The mechanism clicked again, and this time a rectangular section swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a space about 2 feet wide and 3 feet tall. Inside, carefully wrapped in plastic and arranged with obvious care, were stacks of documents, photograph albums, and what appeared to be personal letters tied with ribbon. Carmen moved closer, shining her phone's flashlight into the compartment. "This is like something out of a spy movie," she whispered. "How long do you think this has been here?" The journal entries continued over the years, documenting Dolores's life alone at the motel. She had kept the business running successfully through the 1990s, always hoping that someday Sarah would return or at least contact her. But as the years passed and the highway bypass was built, the motel's fortunes declined, and Dolores faced the reality that she might never see her dear friend again. March 2020 found Sarah's obituary online today. "She died 2 years ago, and I never knew." Her daughter Victoria manages a bookstore in Ashford. "She looks exactly like her mother at that age. I've been watching from a distance, trying to decide if I should reach out. Sarah made me promise, but she's gone now. Maybe it's time." The final plan. The last section of the journal revealed Dolores's carefully planned inheritance strategy. She had spent months researching Victoria's life, learning about her love of books, her rescue dog, her quiet existence in Ashford. Dolores had seen in Victoria the same gentle strength that had drawn her to Sarah decades earlier. January 2023. "I'm dying. The doctors confirmed it last week. Cancer, too advanced for treatment. But this gives me time to set things right. Victoria deserves to know her mother's story, to understand why Sarah lived with such sadness. Maybe she can find peace where her mother couldn't." February 2023. Met with the lawyers today. Everything is arranged. Victoria will inherit the motel, but more importantly, she'll inherit the truth. I've left clues that someone with her intelligence and curiosity will follow. The hidden room contains everything. All the proof that her mother was a wonderful woman who made a mistake that wasn't really a mistake at all. Victoria found herself crying as she read the final entries, written in increasingly shaky handwriting as Dolores's illness progressed. May 2023. I dream about Sarah often now. I tell her I'm going to help her daughter understand. Sarah always worried that Victoria would think less of her if she knew about the accident, about the guilt that shaped her entire life. But Victoria seems like someone who understands that good people can carry burdens that aren't theirs to bear. May 15th, 2023. This is probably my last entry. I can feel myself getting weaker. But I'm at peace knowing that Victoria will find this room, will read these words, will understand that she comes from a line of women who care deeply and love fiercely. The motel was Sarah's dream once. Maybe it can be Victoria's second chance. The transformation. Victoria sat on the floor of room 11, surrounded by the scattered pieces of her family's hidden history. Carmen sat beside her, occasionally handing her tissues or offering quiet support. Ranger had finally settled down, lying across Victoria's feet as if protecting her from any further shocks. "Your mother never told you any of this?" Carmen asked gently. Victoria shook her head. "She always said she and my father met in Portland, lived there their whole lives. I knew she had periods of sadness, times when she would get quiet and distant, but I thought it was just her personality. I never imagined she was carrying something like this." Victoria picked up one of the last photographs in the collection, Sarah and Dolores standing together in front of the motel, both smiling, both young and full of dreams. On the back, Sarah had written, "For my dearest friend Dolores, thank you for believing in impossible dreams. Love always, Sarah." She wasn't running from cowardice, Victoria realized aloud. She was running from love. She loved this place and these mountains so much that when something terrible happened here, she couldn't bear to stay. But she also couldn't bear to destroy what she and Dolores had built. Victoria stood up and walked to the window of room 11, looking out at the forest and mountains that surrounded the Sunset Haven. In the late afternoon light, she could see what her mother had seen 40 years ago, the possibility of creating something beautiful in this peaceful place. The decision. Over the next several hours, Victoria and Carmen explored the rest of the motel with new eyes. The hidden room had also contained financial records showing that Dolores had managed to keep the property taxes current and the basic utilities connected. The structure was in better condition than it had appeared from the outside. With some investment and hard work, the Sunset Haven could be restored. But more than that, Victoria now understood why Dolores had been so certain she was the right person to inherit this place. It wasn't just about the property. It was about healing a wound that had shaped her family for decades. That evening, as they sat in Annie's diner having dinner, Victoria made her decision. "I'm going to reopen it," she told Carmen. "Not right away. It'll take months of work and most of my savings. But this place meant something to my mother, and it meant something to Dolores. Maybe it's time for the Sunset Haven to mean something again." Carmen smiled. "You know I think you're crazy, right? But also that I'm going to help you however I can." 6 months later, Victoria stood in front of the restored Sunset Haven Motel as the neon sign flickered to life for the first time in over a decade. She had kept her bookstore but hired a manager, allowing her to split her time between Ashford and Willowbrook. The motel now operated as a boutique retreat, attracting visitors who wanted to disconnect from the digital world and reconnect with nature. In the office, Victoria had created a small display honoring the motel's history, including photographs of Sarah and Dolores during the property's early years. She had also added Dolores's final journal entry, written in a letter she had left with the lawyer. "Victoria, by the time you read this, you'll know the truth about your mother and this place. Sarah was the best person I ever knew, and her only flaw was loving too deeply. I hope you can find a way to honor her memory by letting the Sunset Haven live again. Some dreams are too beautiful to stay buried forever. With love and hope for your future, Dolores." The legacy. Victoria learned that the most valuable inheritances aren't always money or property. Sometimes they're stories that explain who we are and where we come from. Sometimes they're second chances to fulfill dreams that were interrupted by tragedy and misunderstanding. The Sunset Haven Motel that everyone had dismissed as worthless junk had held the key to understanding her family's past and shaping her own future. And in the quiet moments when she walked through the restored property with Ranger at her side, Victoria could feel the presence of two women who had loved this place enough to preserve it across decades of separation and silence. The truth had indeed changed everything, not just Victoria's understanding of her inheritance, but her understanding of herself. If this story inspired you to look deeper into your own family history or to take a chance on something others might call worthless, share it with someone who needs to remember that the most meaningful gifts often come disguised as burdens. Subscribe for more stories about the extraordinary discoveries hiding in ordinary inheritances.